Have you ever wondered how developers are able to create these seamless, smooth typography effects? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be demonstrating exactly how to do this, and we're going to be doing it using Frame of Motion and also React. I'll also leave a link in the description to the person who inspired me to create this project, and that can be found on the awards.com website, so definitely go check it out. I first started by opening up the terminal on VS Code and typed in npx create react app and called the project typography effect. After doing this, I then went into my browser to check the React application was working properly. From here, I then installed Frame of Motion using npm install Frame of Motion in the terminal. Once Frame of Motion was installed, I then imported the rest of the assets required for the build, which included the various images and font family. If you want to get access to these assets, I'll provide a link in the description, which will take you to the project page on my website. And from here, you can get access to the GitHub repository for the final project. So if you want to follow along, definitely go check it out. However, if you want to use your own, that's totally fine as well. So once you've done all of these steps, we can now jump right into it. I've also got the Figma file opened up here, which will make the process a lot faster for us. And yeah, without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to come over to our source folder. And from here, what we want to do is go inside of our app.js file here. And we want to delete everything within the app div inside of here. We also want to get rid of the logo. After doing that, we then want to go inside of app.css and delete all of these styles. Save that file. And then the next step is we want to go inside of index.css. We want to delete all of the styles. So we are starting from fresh. And what we first want to do is to import the font that I imported over locally, which is known as Inter. Again, this can be found in the description on my website if you want to follow along. So what you want to do to bring that in is type in @font face. And then from here, let's type in Inter. And then we want to target it from the public folder. So go inside of public folder, go into fonts, and then click on Inter-black. After doing that, we then want to style our H1 tag as seen in the Figma design over here. So what we want to do is type in H1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go directly inside of our Figma design here. I'm going to click on the H1 text. And inside of here, it gives us all of the styles already made for us. So I'm just going to copy this directly. And what I'm going to do, come back into here, paste this. And since we're using this font family over here, what we can do is instead of using Inter, we want to make sure it's in single quotations like so. After doing so, we also want to get rid of line height, the font style. And if we come back into the design, it's capitalized or uppercase rather. So what we're going to do is type in text transform and type in uppercase. So after doing that, the next thing we want to do is to work on the body. So if we come over to our body here, and if we click on the background, it has a background of this hex code here. So I'm just going to copy it over. And for doing so, I'm going to put in a margin of 0, padding again of 0, and the background color set to that color that I got from the Figma file, which was hashtag 010101. To make sure this is working, what we can do is to go back into app.js. And if we hit enter, type in a H1, and let's just type in, this is a test. So if we come back into our browser here, this is what it's looking like, and it's looking exactly like the Figma design. This means we're doing everything correctly. After doing those changes, if we come back into the Figma file, what we want to do is we want to create a section that holds all of these text containers over here. So in order to do that, what we can do is get rid of the H1 tag since we no longer need it. Type in section.typography container. And this is the section that will hold all of the H1 tags as shown in the Figma design. Once we've done that, we then want to go into our app.css file here, and we want to target the typography container. So I'm going to type that in here. And what we want to do here is make sure it's displayed to flex, align the items to center, justify content to center as well. So everything's in the middle. We want to make sure that the flex direction is set to column. So everything runs from top to bottom. And then we want to make sure the height is set to 100 vertical height and the width set to 100 vertical width. So it spans the entire viewport. Save that. And that is starting to look really good. To make sure this is working properly, I'm going to go and type in another H1 and type in this is another test just to make sure it's working properly. So if I come back into the design, it should be directly in the center, which it is. After doing your global styles, the next part of the video is we're going to be designing the individual title components as shown in the Figma design. This is where we start to have those really nice transitions and where the magic really happens. So let's get right into it now. So what we're going to do is inside of your source folder here, we're going to create a new folder and call it components. Inside of components, we want to create a new folder, and this one is going to be title, which is going to be our individual title components. And inside of the title folder, what we want to do is to type in title.jsx, which will be the JavaScript file. And then the second file we want is a styling file. So we're going to put in title.css, and this will control all of the styling for what it will look like. So after doing that, what we want to do is to go inside of our title.jsx file here, type in the following, RAFCE, should create this nice template for us. So instead of having a div, what we want to do is to change this to an A tag. So type that in there, then give it a href of /, so it just goes back to the home page. Again, you can change this in your own project if you wish. After creating your A tag, the next thing we're going to do is if we come back into the Figma design, you'll notice we not only do we have one H1 tag, but we actually have two. So the first word, the second word, and in between those two H1 tags, we have an image. So we're going to create that now. So if I come back into the title.jsx file here, I might just close this so it's easier for you guys to see. What I can do now is type in H1 and type in first. In between the H1, we want to put in an image tag here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the first image, which has been sourced inside of the source file. So it should be under here and just type in first.png. And if I replace my image with curly brackets, first image, and for the sake of this video, again, please make sure to fix up the alt text. But I'm just going to type in a image of nature. And then after doing that, we have a second H1 tag. So if I come back into our title.jsx file here, type in second, to make sure that this is working properly, what we can do now is if we go inside of our app.js file here, we want to import that title that we just created. So we've got that there. And then what we can actually do is delete this H1 tag here and then just type in title like so. This way we'll bring the component over to the app.js file here. We go into the browser. Hopefully it should now appear. Yep, it's appearing. Obviously we haven't styled it, but if your design is starting to look like this, it means you've done all the steps correctly. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to quickly close a lot of these files here since we don't really need them as much now. What we can do now is we want to start styling using the title.css file here. So what we can do is actually just type in import, and we want to bring in that title.css file like so. In fact, I'm just going to quickly fix that up. And to make sure that this is working, what we can do is with the A tag, just type in text decoration, set that to none, and hopefully that underline has been removed. If I come back into here, yep, the underline has been removed. This means it's working. But what we're going to do is if we come back into our app.jsx file, one thing I forgot to add in is a class name. So the class name I'm going to give this is title container, just so we can track exactly where that A tag is. So what we'll do now is just copy this title container here and replace it with that class name. If we come back into here, hopefully that's working. If I refresh the page, yep, that's working. So it looks like everything's ready to go. In order to mimic the design as shown here, what we want to do is to follow the following CSS properties. So the first thing we want to do is to set a display of flex. So change it to a flex box. With the flex direction, instead of making it column, we want to make sure it's set to row. So it spans from left to right as shown in the design. After doing so, the next thing we want to do is to type in align items to center. We also want to justify the content to center so everything's nice and balanced within the middle of the page. After doing that, we want to set a fixed height of something like 6 rem. That way it brings down the image to a smaller size. We also want to give it a padding of 1 rem to the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right, just so there's a bit of space. As you can see in the design, we have some spacing between each title component. The next thing we want to do is with the text decoration, like what I did before, set that to none. After doing that, we also want to make sure it spans the entire viewport. So just type in 100 vertical width. After doing that, we also want to give it a border bottom as well and give this something like 1 pixel solid with RGB, I don't know, 50, 50, 50. Save that. If I come back into the design, this is how it's starting to look. Again, the image is quite large, but don't worry, we'll fix that up right now. To fix the image up, all you do is just type in image. And from here, all you have to do is type in height and set that to 100%. And for the padding, let's give it 0, the top and bottom, and 0.75 rem, the left and right. And if we come over to here, it now looks like this. Once you've completed the styling, the next step we want to do is to start using the usestate hook with React to determine if a user is hovering over a title, like I am here. We want the open state to look exactly like the way we have styled it here. And once the user moves the cursor away from the title, we want it to close. In order to achieve that, what we can do now is go back into our title.jsx file here. And what you want to type in is usestate. What this should do is it should bring in the usestate property, or the usestate hook rather, as you can see here from React. And after doing that, what we're going to do now is come underneath here, create a const, square bracket, type in is hovered, and set is hovered, equal this to a usestate value of false. What this basically tells us is this is hovered is currently equal to false, meaning on default, the value is set to false once the user loads up the page. However, once the user goes on top of in this case, the A tag, the title container, we want the value of is hovered to change to true. And this can be controlled using the set is hovered statement as shown here. So what we can do now is we can come underneath here with the A tag. And what we can actually do is to create two functions. So the first function we want to determine is on mouse enter equals. And what we want to do here is we want to create an arrow function, and we want to grab the set is hovered. And what we want to do is to set this to true. We want to copy this down as well. So once the user moves away from that title, we want to change this. Instead of enter, we want to change it to leave and set this value to false. What this basically means is once the user puts their cursor over the A tag, we want the is hovered value to change to true, which is controlled by using set is hovered. And once the user moves the mouse away, we want the value to be changed to false, which is back to where the default state is as shown here. To make sure that this is working properly, what we can do is we can actually console log out the is hovered value. And what we can actually do is if I open up our file here, if I inspect the element, and if I refresh the page, as you can see, it's set to false. However, once I put the cursor over the title, the value changes to true. And if I go off it, again, it goes back to false. And this keeps repeating until the user stops. So once your design is looking like this and your console log is looking correct, we can now get rid of the console.log value here. And for the next step, this is where all the magic happens. We're going to be using frame of motion to create some really cool animation transition effects. So let's get into that now. So what you want to do is underneath the import.title.css file here, what we want to do is to import our motion from framer motion. So this line here basically implies that we're bringing in the motion capabilities from framer motion into our .jsx file here. So after doing that, what we're going to do is come over to our image value here, since this is the item we want to create the motion on. And in order to create a motion to a particular div, all you have to do is just type in motion.image. And this basically means it's activating the frame of motion properties onto that image div. After doing that, in order to bring in some frame of motion properties, what you can do is type in animate equals and put in two curly brackets as shown here. And within here, what we can actually do is start to manipulate some of the CSS properties and make it look really seamless and really cool. For instance, let's say we wanted to manipulate the width of that image based on a conditional statement. So for example, if is hovered is true, then we want the value of the width to be set to 6 rem. Otherwise, we want that value to be set to 0 rem, which basically implies that it no longer exists. So if I save this, if I go back into our file here, as you can see, it no longer exists. However, once the user puts the cursor over the title, we now have that transition, and that's looking really cool. So that's the first property. The next property you want to put in is opacity. And again, we can use a conditional statement like before. So if is hovered is true, we want the value of the opacity to be set to 100%. However, if it's false, we want the value to be set to 0%, like so. After doing that, the third and final property is we want to create a padding effect. So in order to bring in this padding effect, again, we can bring in that conditional statement. So if is hovered is true, then we want the value of the padding to be set to 0 rem for the top and bottom and 0.75 rem for the left and right. After doing that, if it is false, we want the value here to be set to 0. And if we come back into here, as you can see, the two words are connected. However, when I put my cursor over it, it now brings out a bit of a padding and a nice opacity effect. And that's looking really, really cool. You may wonder, how can you control the way it looks and the transitional effect? Well, it's really simple. What you can actually do with frame of motion, which I love about it, is you can type in transition and you can equal that to double curly brackets. And in here, what you can actually do is you can set an ease. In this case, I'm going to use something called back out, and let's see how that looks. So if I come back into the file, that's quite fast for me. In order to slow that down, what you can do is set a duration, and I'm going to give it something like, I don't know, 0.5 seconds. I'll save that. Let's see how that looks. That looks really, really clean and really, really nice. So for the final part of the video, once you've completed your frame of motion properties and also working with your usestate hooks, the next step we're going to do is inside of the app.js file here, what we're going to do is to start customizing what text we actually want within each title component. And this can be done using props. So we're going to do that right now. So what we can do now is if we come back into our title.jsx file, what we want to do is we want to have a couple props. So the first prop is to determine what the first word is as shown in this h1 tag here. So I'm going to give it first. The second prop we want to put in is second. So let's put in second, the second word. And finally, the third prop we want to do is to manipulate what the image is. So let's type in image. And what we can do now is, since we're going to use image as a prop, we can therefore get rid of this line here, save that. What we can do now is, instead of having the text first using curly brackets, type in first. Again, we're going to copy this over. So we apply that prop to the second h1 tag here, call that second. And after doing that, what we're going to do is to grab your image prop as well. And instead of having first, we want to change that to image, save that. And we now have our props in place, which is starting to look really cool. What we can do now is, if I go back into our app.js file here, what I'll go and do is I'll show you the first example using the Figma design here. So the first h1 tag is outdoor. So what I'm going to do is type in first equals outdoor. The second h1 is escape. So I'm going to copy that, go back into here, second equals escapes. And the third one is our image. So what I can do now is import first from the source folder, inside of source, our images, and our first.png image. And what we can do now is replace this with first. If I save that, and if I come back into our file here, there we go. We have the text that is also shown in the Figma design. And if we hover over it, we have this really cool transitional effect. And a really neat feature about having props is you can come back into here and type in, I don't know, test escapes for the sake of the video. But as you can see, you can actually manipulate what the text is on the component, which is awesome. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply this exact same effect, but copy the amount of titles as shown here. In this case, we have 5. And once I do that, I'll show you what it looks like. So I've duplicated the title component a couple more times. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and gone back into my Figma file here, and I've copied over all the text and images as shown up here. And if we come back into our design on the browser, this is how it's starting to look. If I put it to full page, this is what it's starting to look like. And that's looking really, really cool. As a bonus tip, you may notice, again, you can skip this part if you want, but you may notice that the responsive design of this isn't great. So if I actually zoom in, it doesn't really have that nice transitional effect when we have it in a mobile screen. So in order to fix this, what we can do is go back into our design here, go into title.css, and from here we can make some media queries. So at media screen, and let's say, I don't know, the max width set to something like 1200 pixels. We want the h1 tag to be set to a font size of something like, I don't know, 5 rem. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this over, and then for anything with a maximum width of something like 700 pixels. So for mobile users, let's set the font size to 2 rem. So if I come back into the design, hopefully when I decrease the size of the viewport, the size should change. And again, we still have those transitional effects, and that's looking really, really cool. Fantastic. That's the end of the video. I hope you really enjoyed that. If you want to see more content related to React, frame of motion, or even Next.js, definitely go subscribe to my channel as I upload roughly every 2 weeks, depending on what my schedule is like. And again, if you did enjoy it, please leave a comment. It really does mean a lot to me. And yeah, that's the end of it. And I will catch you all in the next one. See you later.